Welcome to CNN Talk, and we're talking about sport, or are we, Nina? I mean, this is an interesting topic because this is a sports star, an Australian rugby player, who is accused of making homophobic comments, has lost his role in the team. He's sticking by it because he says it's a matter of religion. Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is actually emblematic of one of the hugest debates taking place in our society now, and that's like, where do you draw the line between freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and hate speech, right? So I would argue that in this case, with this athlete, I mean, superstar athlete, he had been given a warning by his team, because he had repeatedly been posting things on social media about how gay people are going to go to hell, along with fornicators. And he's a public figure. And they were telling him, this is hate speech. You could put people in danger. Don't do it again. And this has been rumbling on for about a year. And what does he do? He does it again. He posts all over his social media that gay people are going to go to hell. And then he defends it by saying, that's my religious view. Fine, he can say it, but I think there have to be repercussions. You don't choose to be gay. You're born gay. So if I say all black people are going to go to hell, or all white people are going to go to hell, or all women are going to go to hell, saying that it's my religion does not condone that kind of hate speech.
It's interesting, the choice element there, because some of the other sort of groups he was hitting out at, fornicators, for example, there's an element of choice. You can choose not to be a fornicator, but he's saying people choose to be gay.
Listen, let's just give this a name and let's just call this what it is. It's good old-fashioned bigotry and homophobia. This guy he is a religious zealot and he is homophobic. And interestingly, I've been looking through his timeline this morning on Twitter, going back quite a few years. I thought, maybe let's see if there's a bit of a context here. This guy, for all his Christian values, I couldn't see, and please correct me if I'm wrong, couldn't see hardly any tweets about promoting good Christian values, couldn't see him doing a lot of charity work. I saw this. I saw fundamental Christianity. I saw a kind of really aggressive sort of hetero norm. Unless you're sort of a man and you have married a woman, you're going to go and burn in hell. And I saw a lot of sports and product advertising. So for all this, his kind of Christian sort of values, I just think he is I think he's a religious fanatic, in my view, and I think he is also homophobic, and he's conveniently trying to use the former to cover up the latter.
It's been a real tough challenge, though, for the sports authorities, and sports authorities around the world are presumably looking at this because it doesn't affect his playing ability.
And what a player.
Yeah. And that's what
a role model
they're meant to be judging.
as a player.
They're not normally meant to take into account religious factors.
They're not. It's very, very difficult. My colleagues have summarised it very well. I don't think, in the end, the rugby authorities in Australia had a choice, despite Israel Folau being a national hero, 73 tests for the Wallabies. In Australia, rugby union is, along with cricket, a national religion, particularly when they're playing the Poms and the Kiwis, of course. But I don't think they had a choice, given what Nina said. He was warned several times about this. Having said that, I would just temper it slightly. We have to remember the context of this. Of course, it's hate speech, and I've said that the Australian authorities had no choice. But we must remember that, homosexuality was illegal in this country almost in my lifetime. And I'm not yet a very old man. I'm a middle-aged man, looking well for it.
Notice no one else said anything.
Silence around the table.
Silence, deafening silence.
Rescue me! You chose not to. That was aggressive. I was under the bus.
You put yourself under the bus, mate.
But look, it's, an awful lot of people in the UK, in the US, don't like homosexuality. They think it's a bad thing. Now, of course, we have to stop hate speech, and there are rightly laws to stop hate speech. But I don't think we can dismiss somebody as being completely beyond the pale because this is what they think.
Well, we do it with other people.
This man has made a mistake. He's made a repeated mistake in a very high-profile position. He had to be punished.
He's homophobic.
I agree.
He's homophobic.
Yes, of course, I agree with that, Aisha. And I wouldn't use that kind of speech. But we must remember, in our own society, an awful lot of people That's what they think.
Yeah, but that
that's
doesn't
what
mean,
their
but-
religion tells
sure, but
them, whether they're
but
Christian.
But there are people that want
Muslim,
to. There are people that want to
Catholic.
rape people. There are people that want
No,
to beat
sure,
up
but
black
that's
people.
all-
But you.
Welcome to CNN Talk, where we are gauging your reaction to the Australian rugby star who's been sacked over his religious beliefs, in his words.
5 months to go until the Rugby World Cup. International future of Australian fullback Israel Folau hangs in the balance.
Rugby Australia has fired Wallaby star Israel Folau over an anti-gay social media post.
It's not the first time he's posted something that's got him into trouble.
The 30-year-old player was found guilty last week of breaching Australian rugby's code of conduct. He posted a list including drunks.
Liars, atheists, and homosexuals saying, quote, hell awaits you.
Folau has 72 hours to appeal the decision.
It's where sport and religion collide, and it puts an individual's right to religious freedom up against sports bodies and all organisations where the political try and be more diverse and inclusive.
Have your say on Facebook. Risa says, just play. Nobody cares about your beliefs. Damien says he wasn't sacked over his religious beliefs. And Athena says he wasn't sacked for what he said, but for breaking his contract. Have your say there. And thank you for listening as well. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, look up CNN Talk and subscribe, crucially. Where do you stand on this, Liam?
Well, I don't think the Australian rugby authorities had any choice. As we said in the Facebook introduction to this show, he had done this before. He had been warned. It wasn't his contract that he couldn't tweet things like this. This is hate speech. This is homophobia. Despite being a national hero, a 73 times capped legendary fullback in a legendary team that is very much, you know, a source of national celebration, he had to be removed because of what he said. Though I would temper it slightly because, you know, in the end, an awful lot of people agree with him.
Let's look at the offending image. To warn you, it is offensive. But we need to bring it up for editorial reasons. So he's talking about drunks, homosexuals, adulterers, liars, fornicators, thieves, atheists and idolaters. Hell awaits you, repent. He then adds a quote from the Bible that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. Quickly get his response as well to the news that he is no longer playing. As Australians, we are born with certain rights, including the right to freedom of religion and freedom of expression. Upholding my religious beliefs should not prevent my ability to work or play for my club and country. We're going to go to Alex on this because, Alex, this is something that the Australian rugby authorities have been grappling with, and it's something they're not used to grappling with. And how do you understand they got through this process?
It's clearly been a real issue for them, Max, because they've taken more than a week from having found Folau guilty of the highest possible level of breach of Rugby Australia's players' code of conduct to actually coming out and confirming it would mean that his multi-million-dollar contract to play rugby in Australia has been torn up. And this comes a little more than 4 months ahead of the Rugby World Cup, with the Australian team in possibly their worst run of form for decades, dropped down to 6th in the world rankings. Folau played for them in the last Rugby World Cup final here in the UK in 2015. So they've shot themselves in the foot as far as their performance on the pitch is concerned, over what they see as a breach of contract. And Folau came from rugby league, and the National Rugby League in Australia is a huge sporting competition there. They've already said they're not going to take Folau back. So at the age of 30, arguably at the peak of his career, his rugby career in his home country is over, Max.
Are sports authorities around the world looking at this as a case that they might have to sort of deal with in future or similar cases?
This is the really interesting thing. I've been doing this job for almost 30 years, and I can't remember another time, and I've been checking with my colleagues across the Atlantic in America, where, of course, there are plenty of athletes in famous sports bodies like the NFL or the NBA who have strong Christian beliefs. We've seen athletes in the NFL punished for kneeling in protest about African-American rights, but often we've seen them kneeling in terms of their Christianity, but it's never conflicted with also sports bodies' efforts to try and be all-inclusive to people of all sexualities. So I'm actually really surprised this hasn't come up before, and maybe it will come up a lot more often in the future.
That's what's interesting about it, isn't it, Aisha? The fact that organisations and sports bodies around the world are going to have to look at this case, because if one comes up in their backyard, as it were, they're going to have to deal with it somehow. And it's the line of where, you know, your religious beliefs cross into your ability to perform your job.
Well, it's not just sports organisations, it's all organisations, it's all media platforms, including sort of CNN. You know, we've just had a big scandal here in the United Kingdom with the BBC when a very well-loved broadcaster, national treasure, prominent football commentator Danny Baker was sacked for making a very, very ill-advised racist tweet likening the new mixed heritage royal baby to a chimpanzee. He immediately, you know, was forced to resign or sacked. And
He
I think,
apologised,
well,
crucially.
he actually didn't straight away. He then apologised afterwards.
But
So
he
claimed he didn't understand.
He
But what's
doubled
fundamentally
down.
different about this case is he's absolutely standing by everything. He hasn't
isn't.
deleted
Now,
his
so
post.
There's a couple of things to sort of unpick here. First of all, LGBTQ rights around the world are really, really under attack now. We sort of take it for granted that because there are, you know, a few well-known sort of, you know, gay men at the top of most industries, that everything is okay. Like, if you look at the statistics in terms of attacks and bullying and self-harm and suicide and mental health issues, LGBTQ people, particularly young people, have a really, really hard time. It's particularly hard to come out as a gay person in sport, particularly in the very, very sort of macho worlds of football and rugby. And to be fair to both of these organisations, they are trying really, really hard to sort of say, look, our sport is one that everybody can be included in. Women, minority groups, people from the gay communities, or the International Gay Rugby, which is the organisation for sort of inclusivity, you know, has said, look, the effects of these hateful comments will have a really, really damaging effect in terms of what they're trying to do. But there's more than that. Look, sure, we believe in free speech, and he can say and believe whatever he wants. And my colleague Liam is right. Muslims, Jewish people, Christians, and lots of people have homophobic beliefs, right? You can have those beliefs, but if the club has a specific clause in the contract and the club is thinking about its reputation and the sport is thinking about its reputation, it has the right to terminate your contract. And he's not just some average guy on the street. He is a person, because of his contract, because of the positions and his talent and everything like that, he has a position of extreme privilege. That gives him sponsorship, that gives him vast amounts of wealth, that gives him a huge amount of influence. And brands and organisations are really, really alive to this. We've had discussions here about how Roseanne Barr was sacked for calling somebody looking like a monkey. There's a bit of a theme here, you know, in terms of... And so organisations are really, really alive to that, and commercial organisations or sporting authorities are really, really keen. And they know as well, by the way, and I'm sure a lot of his sponsorship deals will go, because I'll tell you something, gay people are customers, and gay people have money, and gay people will look at who he has sponsorship deals with, and they won't buy those trainers anymore. So there's a moral consequence, there's a reputational consequence, but there's a big financial and commercial consequence as well.
But he, you know, he's known for his religious views, and even after he was sacked, this was his latest post on Instagram, where he's doubling down effectively on his religious views. And we quote, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to their purpose, his purpose. So what he's saying there is, I'm putting religion above all of this. I still believe in what I did. Do you agree?
Well, yeah. I mean, the great irony of that is, of course, if you look at, you know, what Christian doctrine preaches, it preaches, aside from some of the controversial things on homosexuality, that you should be accepting and loving to all. I think what he's very clearly doing by doubling down is now framing the narrative so that he becomes a martyr, right? He's doing this thing that because he practiced his freedom of speech, because he practices freedom of expression and his free right to practice his religion, he's being penalized for that. That is an issue that goes beyond sport and beyond rugby. It's one of the main, you know, huge issues of debate in our democratic societies today. Where do you draw the line with freedom of speech? And I think it's quite clear, actually. Freedom of speech does not mean freedom to spread hatred or incite hatred. And that's actually what he was doing. Let's not forget the context here. As Aisha has already pointed out, he's incredibly influential. He has huge amounts of sway. He has hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people looking up to him. And he has a consistent history of saying homophobic things. He was warned, you do not do this, over a year, and yet he continued to do it. So he was not only breaching his contract, but he was actually, after being given a warning.
He broke the code of conduct, not his contract, as we understand it.
Code of conduct, the ethics he has to stand by as somebody in the public eye. But he was actually warned that he could be putting people in danger.
Yes.
And he decided to go out all guns blazing.
For people who aren't rugby fans or Australian rugby fans, he's got 62 caps for Australia, 3 times Rugby Union Player of the Year. He was the 2017 finalist for World Player of the Year. He's a towering figure in the sport.
And don't the Aussies need him ahead of Japan, as we heard? It's a great team, but they've fallen on tough ground recently. And look, if you take the big bucks, if you're a world-class player and you choose to make your living that way, earning millions and millions of dollars, you are in the public eye. You do then have responsibilities that go beyond those of ordinary people playing a game of football or rugby on a Sunday afternoon for a pub team. And it's almost as if, given that he had been warned, and I don't want to cast aspersions, but it may be that he was almost goading the authorities. You don't dare to sack me because I am such a great player. And he is an astonishing player. And this is what's so sad. My son is a rugby nut, and Israel Folau is one of his favourite players because of the way he plays. And now you have to sit down with your sons and your daughters who are rugby fans and explain to them why he's not going to be playing in Japan. And when you are such a public figure, you are subject to rules that go beyond the norm. What he did was homophobic. I mean, this wasn't just a random thing. It was almost like a sustained campaign of tweets. I've looked through the tweets as well. I don't want to say he should have gone. I'm all for free speech, and I'm a huge rugby fan and a fan of his as a player. But the Australian rugby authorities had no choice.
Patrick says he's a great young man. But Debbie says hate isn't Christian. And Diva says, never mix religious beliefs with your profession. Who did that, though? Was it the player who mixed religious beliefs with his profession, or was it the ruling body that effectively called a judgment on it?
Take a look at his timeline. I would say everybody go on Twitter and have a look at this guy's timeline.
I agree.
Well, I'll show you this one. This is from September 2018. This is a previous post. Be brave enough to follow Jesus, even if it means losing your reputation with the world.
Well, I think I would
he's putting religion above
absolutely. I think this is what he's done himself. I would say, I think he's actually quite a religious fundamentalist. I think he is an extreme Christian, and I think he is so... honestly, if you look at his Twitter timeline, the majority of posts are quotes from the Bible. It's very, very, very hyper-religious. Interestingly, by the way...
That's fine,
but
not in this
Well,
context.
exactly. Let me... So we asked about, is he putting religion above all? You can tell from looking at his timeline. You can tell a lot about looking at people's timeline. Mine is pretty boring. It's about sort of politics and a bit of feminism and, a bit of a rubbish joke.
Quite a lot of smut as well.
Exactly.
So smutty.
Exactly, so smutty. But you've got to balance it out with the left-wing politics.
Really
actually, it's really interesting. Everyone follow me immediately. But the other thing, to pick up on Nina's point, what I did find, looking through his timeline, was I didn't see that much of a promulgation of other Christian values like tolerance or charity. I found a lot of sports sponsorship, Ralph Lauren, Asics trainers. So there was a lot of dollar and a lot of biblical quotes and a bit of homophobia. And it's just like, I think that kind of...
Others could be dragged in. I mean, we've got a tremendous player in this country, Billy Villapola.
Yes.
Who, again, is a hero to many, many rugby fans, rightly so, an incredibly explosive player. Went to school in the UK and has really been taken to the heart of the nation over many years. And yet he's been tweeting, supporting messages for Israel Folau on this point. And I'm afraid Villapola could find himself in hot water.
Well, it's interesting you say that because Gareth Thomas,
48 hours.
Yeah. Gareth Thomas, who is an openly gay British international player, he's one of the first players, I think, to sort of come out. He's actually waded in and he's hit out at Billy for supporting this guy. And, you know, he's just, like, expressed his sadness. Now, what Israel Folau had said was that hell awaits gay people. And actually, Gareth Thomas has done a very nice tweet saying, that's not true. And if you're a young person, don't be frightened by this. Happiness awaits
Let's
gay
look
people.
at one of those messages from Venipola, Nina. This is what he said in reaction to this whole story. I don't hate anyone, neither do I think I'm perfect. There just comes a point when you insult what I grew up believing in, that you just say enough is enough. He's saying how we live our lives needs to be closer to how God intended them to be.
Okay, so, I mean, clearly he shares the kind of Christian view about homosexuality, but as we've already pointed out on this panel, if this is his view, he can hold that view privately. The Australian Rugby Union didn't force him to come out and say, you know, we want you to say really encouraging things about homosexuality. It was him who's been doing this sustained attack on gay people. So, again, this is, you don't get to use the fig leaf of religion to spout hateful views. And I don't care what religion it is. You can be a Buddhist, you can be a Muslim, you can be Jewish. If you say that certain people are condemned to hell because of how they are born, that is not acceptable. That is hate speech. And again, this obfuscation between freedom of expression and freedom to practice your religious belief versus hate speech is one that needs to be really clearly defined. And I actually don't think it's that difficult. And I think in the context of many views that are, you know, in our kind of multicultural societies, actually we have to, especially religious views, they have to be subject to more scrutiny, especially if you're a liberal and you believe in a liberal, tolerant society.
Amanda on Facebook's pointing out that he appeared in a gay magazine when it helped him. He's just a hypocrite.
Oh, that's interesting.
I didn't know that.
That's very, very interesting. That's often the way. The other thing that's important to note is when you enter the public eye in any way, if you get a big deal with a, you know, I know from the music industry often, one of the big bits of advice you get is basically don't tweet about religion, don't tweet about politics, actually. Sort of, it's in your interest and, you know, to not sort of really, if you have very, very strong views about this. So, you know, this is not like a new thing. So I think he's been quite a provocateur about this. You know, he has been very,
forcing his
very...
view.
We've got to be careful here, though, haven't we? As I said in the introduction, you know, I totally acknowledge he should have been sacked after the warnings he had. I'm completely with my colleagues. We can't demonise religion, though. Sometimes I'm not religious myself. You know, I grew up in a semi-religious environment, certainly my extended family. But, you know, you get the feeling now that people are demonised if a teacher wears a cross around her neck to school. I mean, I think that's crazy that he or she can't do that. If somebody wears a yarmulke...
Or a woman, or a Muslim woman, there's a headscarf. Our potential Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, demonises
and we have to be careful when discussing these kind of issues.
We're going to be back in just a moment. Have your say on our Facebook feed, facebook.com/CNN9. Risa is saying, what would Jesus do? There's a lot of this theme that what he's done isn't actually very Christian.
Yeah, and I was like listening to a lot of rugby players actually debating this and sports pundits, and they were saying one of their primary pieces that was coming out in these conversations was that a lot of Christians had written into them and said, he doesn't stand for us. You know, this is not Christianity in the way that I interpret it. What would Jesus do? Well, Jesus famously, who, you know, had lunch with the dregs of society, you know, washed the prostitutes' feet. I don't think that he would be condemning gay people if you believe Jesus is the man who is purported to be in the Bible.
Yeah.
But just picking up on that, I think that's a really, really good point, because like with one of the other posts that he did, his Australian teammate, David Pocock, he kind of was really sort of coming out in solidarity with a lot of the bigotry that the gay community face. And he had said that he wouldn't marry his own partner until gay marriage was publicised. And he tweeted this big public denouncement of homophobia. And he actually did a tweet saying, in the words of one of my heroes, which was Desmond Tutu, my humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human together.
Yeah. Spot on.
We're discussing today the sacking of the rugby player Israel Folau, sacked over his religious beliefs. He says support coming in for him and a lot of criticism. Atanuki saying sinners will go to hell. He's the one being persecuted, so people criticising him will go to hell. Abdullah says, I'm with Folau. But James says, I'd rather follow Jesus than Folau. And Risa says Jesus would not agree with this man. A lot of people suggesting that actually the sort of hate speech as they see it isn't Christian at all, so it's all very hypocritical. A big quandary for the Chief Executive of Rugby Australia as she had to consider this whole process. Let's hear from her.
Our clear message to all rugby fans today is that we need to stand by our values and the qualities of inclusion, passion, integrity, discipline, respect and teamwork. Over the last hour, I've communicated directly with the players, all professional players, to make it clear that Rugby Australia fully supports their right to their own beliefs and nothing that has happened changes that. But when we are talking about inclusiveness in our game, we're talking about respecting differences as well. When we say rugby is a game for all, we mean it. People need to feel safe and welcomed in our game, regardless of their gender, race, background, religion or sexuality.
She wasn't expecting to have to consider these sorts of issues, was she, when she took that job?
No, she wasn't. And good on her for coming out and saying that. I mean, I still can't believe that this is controversial, because if you are a public figure like he is, and you tweeted something like, all fornicators, all thieves, and all women and black people are going to hell, I think it would be no question, you know, you are going to be removed from the job because that's hate speech. So this kind of fig leaf that he's trying to use of his religious beliefs justifying this kind of hate speech, I simply don't buy it. And what is really interesting from the comments we're getting today and also from other debate around this is that a lot of Christians don't buy that either.
No, a lot of Christians are hitting out at him. It's interesting, isn't it?
And I think that's very heartening. And I mean, I agree with Nina. I think the Chief Executive handled that really well. I think her words were very, very powerful. I think a lot of other Chief Executives in corporations, but also big trade associations and representative bodies will look at her and think, right, that's kind of really good leadership. Rugby for all is a fantastic kind of emblem. But in terms of the religious point, look, Liam made a really important point, which is, you know, you cannot demonise all religion. We have sat here and talked about the scourge of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and people being persecuted for their choice to follow a religion. So we have to be absolutely mindful of that. But one kind of protected characteristic doesn't allow you to kind of trample on another protected characteristic. So, you know, my right to be a Muslim person doesn't mean that I can sort of say, right, I'm basically now going to beat down on you because you're a homosexual person. That's not how equality and inclusion works. But I do think we are seeing this rise of very, very strong anti-gay transphobia at the moment. We have a big scandal right here happening in the United Kingdom with a lot of religious parents. It's predominantly Muslim, but it's not only Jewish parents, Christian parents as well, really pushing back against British schools, even having the temerity to just start teaching children from a young age nothing about gay sex, but even just saying families can come in different shapes and sizes. There was a programme called No Outsiders, and people are going absolutely sort of, you know, there's so much division around that. And I do feel that we've reached this point in terms of our evolution on equality where we've all been trying to sort of rise everything up, but there are competing tensions now that we have to be aware of.
If all us Australian LGBTQ rugby fans went to hell, the stadiums would be awfully empty.
Yes, that's
Are
true.
they thinking about the commercial...
Sometimes the idea... Of course, sometimes the idea, oh, go to hell, it's a sort of turn of phrase. You know, for instance, Donald Tusk, the EU president, said all people who voted Brexit should go to hell. It can be just a turn of phrase. In this case, it clearly isn't, because this was part of a sustained series of tweets. It's important to look back at the timeline to get the context. You know, using the Bible as a way of saying that gay people and even people who have sex are immoral. I mean, that's just mad.
No
I mean,
rugby team.
Yeah,
They're all going to hell.
What would happen to the race?
You also mentioned drinking, drunkards.
Just to push back a tiny bit, if only for the purposes of discussion, because an awful lot of people out there, as the comments show, will have some sympathy with Israel Folau, We mustn't demonise all religion, as Aisha rightly said. We must also be, as gay rights are rightly asserted around the world, though there is pushback and there's discrimination goes on, we must also be sensitive to the fact that it took the Western world generations to make these changes. As I said in the introduction, homosexuality was illegal in this country almost within my lifetime. Social norms are changing quickly and the whole world is going on a journey, and those journeys will happen at different paces and in different ways because we all have different cultural backgrounds. So we have to be mindful and tolerant when calling for mindfulness and for tolerance.
But that's...
So I think people there should be a mechanism for, OK, you said that, you're not immediately condemning somebody if they say something out of turn.
Yeah, but you shouldn't, but just because...
I'm not asking for a free... Just let me finish, Alice, please. I'm not asking for a free pass. What I'm saying is that the cause that I think all three of us would espouse of more tolerance and more liberal understanding can be damaged if we're seen to be... Well,
because we're just running out of time this show, so I want to make sure I get my point in. I hear what you're saying, but that is always the excuse that people of great privilege say in terms of, like, listen, things are going a bit too fast, let's not rock the boat too fast. I'm afraid that for a lot of people who have lived under the yoke of oppression and discrimination for, you're right, centuries, from millennia, it doesn't give them any comfort to say, whoa, 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 let's not advance things too quickly now. The quest for equality, the quest for fairness is, you know, it is impatient, it is urgent, because as a human being, you want to be treated sort of fairly.
But it's politically shrewd to bring people with you.
We, you know, this is a debate about sport, but it's more of a debate about religion on Facebook. Asira says, I stand by the Bible's principles and I agree with him, but Noreen says, gays are also God's creation. Folau did not only judge gays, but also judge God on his creation. So it's a huge debate on Facebook. If you want to get involved, do so at facebook.com/StephenandI. Thank you for watching.